My son David and his wife Karen decided I was too old to live alone. So they moved me from my small flat in Manchester to their house in London. I was 75 years old, and my wife Margaret had passed away 3 years ago from cancer. She was my whole world for 47 years, and when she left a part of me died with her. I thought moving in with family would be good for my broken heart. I thought I would be surrounded by love and laughter, and the sound of my grandchildren playing, I thought. David, my only child, my precious son, would take care of me the way I took care of him all those years after Margaret died. I was so wrong about everything. Let me go back to the beginning. My name is Arthur Johnson, and I was born in Manchester in 1949. I grew up in a working-class family. My father was a factory worker, and my mother stayed home to raise me and my 3 sisters. We didn't have much, but we had love, and that was enough. When I was 21, I met Margaret at a dance hall in the city center. She was the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, with long brown hair and eyes that sparkled like stars. We married a year later and bought a small flat in a quiet part of Manchester. It wasn't much, but it was ours. We worked hard. Margaret was a seamstress, and I worked at the same factory as my father. We saved every penny we could and dreamed of having children. After 5 years of trying, David was born. The happiest day of our lives. Margaret cried tears of joy, and I held our son in my arms and promised to protect him forever. I worked double shifts to pay for his school. I took extra jobs on weekends to buy him toys and clothes. I sacrificed everything so he could have a better life than I did. And he did. He went to university. He got a good job in London. He married Karen, a woman from a wealthy family. And he forgot where he came from. After Margaret died, David came to visit me in Manchester. He sat in my small living room and looked around at my simple furniture and my old photographs. And he said, "Dad, you can't stay here alone. It's not safe. You need to come live with us in London." I was touched by his concern. I thought my son still loved me. I thought he wanted to take care of me in my old age. I didn't know then that Karen had put him up to it. She wanted to look like a good daughter-in-law to her friends. She wanted to show off how charitable she was by taking in her poor old father-in-law. I sold my flat for £120,000 because David said, "Dad, give me the money, and I will invest it for you. You will have a nice income for the rest of your life. And when you pass away, it will go to your grandchildren." I trusted him blindly. He was my son after all. So I signed the papers and handed over everything I had worked for my whole life. I packed one small suitcase with my clothes and a few photographs of Margaret, and I said goodbye to the flat where I had lived for 40 years. I thought I was in a new life. I thought I would be happy again. I was wrong. David and Karen lived in a huge house in a wealthy part of London. It had 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a modern kitchen, and a garden that looked like something from a magazine. When I first arrived, I was impressed. I thought my son had done well for himself. Karen greeted me at the door with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She said, "Arthur, welcome. We have prepared a room for you at the back of the house. I hope you will be comfortable." I followed her through the beautiful house, past the expensive furniture and the fancy artwork and the large television, and we came to a small door near the kitchen. She opened it, and there was a narrow staircase leading up. She said, "This is your room. We thought you liked the privacy." I climbed the stairs and found myself in a small room under the eaves. I had a single bed, a small wardrobe, and a window that looked out at the garden wall. And the neighbor asked how it was clean, but it was tiny, smaller than my bedroom, in the Manchester flat. And that flat was small. Karen said the bathroom is downstairs, and you can use it when we are not using it. We have guests often. So please be quick. I said, "Thank you. It is very nice." She left without another word, and I sat on the bed and looked around at my new home. I thought about Margaret and how much I missed her. I thought about my flat and the neighbors I had known for decades. I thought about the garden I used to tend and the pub where I went every Friday night with my old friends, and I wondered if I had made a terrible mistake. But I told myself it would be okay. David loved me and he would take care of me. I just needed to give it time. The first few weeks were not too bad. David came to my room sometimes to say hello and ask how I was adjusting. The grandchildren, Emily, who was 10, and James, who was 8, came to visit me occasionally, and I would tell them stories about when their father was a little boy. They seemed interested at first, but then Karen would call them away, saying, "Arthur, don't fill their heads with old stories. They have homework to do and music lessons and sports practice. They don't have time for fairy tales." I stopped telling stories after that one day. I came downstairs to make myself a cup of tea in the kitchen. Karen was there, and she looked at me with irritation. She said, "Arthur, we have a system here. You cannot just come into the kitchen whenever you want. We have a schedule for meals. Breakfast is at 7:30, lunch at 12:30, and dinner at 6 if you want tea or coffee. You should ask me and I will make it for you." I said, "I am sorry. I didn't know." She said, "Well, now you do please go back to your room, and I will bring you tea when it is time." I went back to my room and sat on my bed, feeling like a child being scolded. I waited for my tea, but it never came. The months passed, and I became invisible in that house. I was allowed to come down for meals, but I had to eat in the kitchen alone. While the family ate in the dining room, Karen said it was because my table manners were embarrassing. She said I chewed too loudly, and I talked with food in my mouth, and I made the children uncomfortable. I tried to change. I really did. I ate slowly and carefully and said nothing. But it didn't matter. She always found something to complain about. "You are eating too fast. Arthur, you are eating too slow. Arthur, you took too much food. Arthur, you didn't take enough food. Arthur, you are always in the way." I stopped coming downstairs for meals altogether, and Karen started bringing food to my room on a tray. It was always cold, and it was always the leftovers from a night before. Sometimes it was just bread and butter. Sometimes it was a small portion of vegetables with no meat. I never complained. I was grateful for anything. I was hungry most of the time, but I didn't want to be a burden. I had my pension from working 40 years in a factory. It was only £400 a month, but it was mine. David had asked me to give him my pension card shortly after I moved in. He said, "Dad, let me manage this for you. I will put in an account with my own money and give you an allowance every month. That way you don't have to worry about bills and things." I trusted him. So I handed over my pension card and never saw it again. Sometimes I would find 20 or 30 pounds on my bedside table with a note that said, "For your needs." I never knew if it was from David or from Karen, but I took it and hid it under my mattress. I saved every penny I could because deep in my heart, I knew that one day I might need it. I knew that my son and his wife might not take care of me. Forever the worst part was the loneliness. I sat in my small room day after day, looking at the same four walls, listening to the sounds of the family. Downstairs, the children, laughing, the television, playing, Karen talking on the phone, David coming home from work. No one ever came to my room. No one ever asked how I was feeling or what I was thinking. I was like a ghost haunting the house of ghosts that no one could see. I thought about Margaret constantly. I talked to her photograph every night and asked her what I should do. I told her I missed her and I wish she was here with me. I told her I was sorry for being such a failure as a father. I told her I didn't know how my son could be so cold and cruel. She would have known what to do. She always knew. The second Christmas in that house was the worst. I had saved money for months from the 20-pound notes that appeared on my bedside table. I had managed to save almost 200 pounds. I wanted to buy gifts for everyone, something small to show that I loved them. I went to a charity shop near the house and bought a book for David. It was a biography of Winston Churchill. He used to like history. When he was a boy, I bought a scarf for Karen. It was blue, her favorite color. I bought a small doll for Emily and a toy car for James. I wrapped them carefully in paper I found in the bin, and I put them under the Christmas tree late on Christmas Eve. I felt happy for the first time in months. I imagined their faces when they opened my gifts. I imagined them realizing that I loved them and that I wasn't just a burden. I was family on Christmas morning. I stayed in my room, as usual, waiting for someone to call me down for breakfast. No one came. At noon, I heard the sound of presents being opened and laughter. And excitement, I waited for someone to bring me my food. Finally, at 2 o'clock, Karen came up the stairs with a tray. She had a small box on it. She put the tray on my bedside table and handed me the box. She said, "This is from us. Merry Christmas, Arthur." I opened the box, and inside was a cheap jumper from a discount store. It was gray and ugly and 2 sizes too big. I said, "Thank you, it is lovely." She said, "You are welcome." Then she turned to leave. I said, "Karen, did you see the gifts I put under the tree?" She stopped and turned around. She looked at me with a strange expression. She said, "Oh, those? Yes, we saw them." I said, "Did you like them?" She said, "Arthur, we don't need things from charity shops. We have everything we need. Please don't waste your money on such things." I threw them in the bin where they belong. I felt like someone had stabbed me in the heart. I said, "You threw them away." She said, "Yes, now eat your food before it gets cold." And she left. I sat on my bed and looked at the tray of cold leftovers, and I couldn't eat. I just sat there staring at the wall, tears running down my face. "Margaret, why did you leave me? Why am I alone? Why does my son hate me?" I asked these questions over and over, but no answer came. I wore that ugly jumper because I had nothing else. But every time I looked at it, I remembered that Christmas and the day my daughter-in-law threw my love in a bin. The day that changed everything was a Tuesday in November. It was raining outside, and I was sitting on my bed reading an old newspaper that someone had left in the kitchen weeks ago. There was a knock on my door, and David came in without waiting for me to answer. He looked uncomfortable. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He said, "Dad, we need to talk." I said, "Yes, David, what is it?" He sat on the edge of my bed and looked at his hands. He said, "Dad, Karen and I have been talking." and we think it's time for you to consider other living arrangements. I said, what do you mean other living arrangements? He said, well, you are getting older and you need more care than we can provide, and the children are getting bigger, and we need your room for a home office for Karen. She wants to work from home sometimes, and she needs a quiet space. I said, this is the smallest room in the house, David. There is no other room. He said, we've found a nice place for your retirement community. In Essex, it's very nice. You will have your own small flat, and there are nurses and activities and people your own age. You will be happy there, Dad, I promise. I said, you are sending me away, David. After everything I did for you, after all the years I worked and sacrificed, you are throwing me out like garbage. He said, Dad, it's not like that. Please understand we have our own lives to live. We can't take care of you forever. I said, what about the money from my flat, the £120,000 I gave you to keep safe? What about my pension you take every month? He looked away. He said, Dad, that money is gone. We used it for the children's school fees and some home renovations and investments that didn't work out. I am sorry. I sat on my bed and felt the world collapse around me. My own son, my precious boy, had stolen everything from me, and now he was getting rid of me. I said, David, I am your father. I raised you alone after your mother died. I worked double shifts in the factory. I went without food so you could eat. I sacrificed my whole life for you, and this is how you repay me. He stood up. He said, Dad, please don't make this difficult. You have 3 days to pack your things. I have booked you a room at a motel near the airport for 1 week. That will give you time to find something permanent. Or go to the retirement community. I have paid for the week. I will come back on Friday to take you there. He left without another word. And I sat on my bed and cried like a child. I cried for my Margaret and for my lost life and for the son who had become a stranger. 3 days later, David came to my room with his car. He helped me carry my one small suitcase down the stairs. No one else was there to say goodbye. Karen was at work. The children were at school. I didn't even get to see my grandchildren. One last time we drove in silence to a motel near the airport. It was a cheap place with rooms that opened to the outside and cars parked everywhere. David checked me in and walked me to room number 7. He opened the door, and inside was a small room with a double bed, a small television, and a bathroom with a shower that had mold in the corners. It was clean enough, but it was sad and depressing. David put my suitcase on the bed and said, well, here you are, Dad. I said, you're just leaving me here. He said, I have paid for a week. Dad, you'll be fine. If you need anything, you can call me. But please don't call too often. Karen doesn't like it. I said, David, please don't do this. Please take me home. He said, this is not your home anymore. Dad, you need to accept that. And he walked out the door and drove away. I sat on the bed in that strange room and listened to planes flying overhead, and I felt completely and utterly alone. I had no money, only the envelope with the money I had saved from the 20-pound notes I had hidden under my mattress over the years. I opened the envelope and counted it, 430 pounds. That was all I had in the world, my entire life, savings after 75 years. On this earth, I had no home, no family, no future, and no hope. I lay on the bed and stared at the ceiling and wondered if it was worth going on. I thought about Margaret and how she would want to keep living. I thought about all the years we had together and all the love we shared, and I decided that for her, I would try to survive. On the 3rd day in the motel, something happened that changed my life forever. I was sitting outside my room on a plastic chair, watching the cars go by, when the door of the room next to mine opened, and an old man came out. He was about my age, maybe older, with white hair and kind eyes and a smile that made me feel less alone. He sat down on the chair next to mine and said, first time here. I nodded and said, yes. He said, my name is George. I've been living here for 6 months. I said, Arthur, nice to meet you, George. We started talking, and I told him my story, everything about David and Karen and the money they took in the room at the back of the house and being thrown away like garbage. George listened without interrupting, his eyes full of understanding. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, Arthur, do you know why I am here? I shook my head. He said, my children did the same thing to me. They took my money, put me in a home, and forgot about me. But I escaped. I said, escaped how? Do you escape from a nursing home? He smiled and said, I had a secret Arthur money that my children didn't know about. I said, what do you mean, George? Said my wife. And we saved for 50 years. We put money in a separate account that no one knew about. We didn't trust the banks entirely. So we kept some cash and some investments in a safe place. When she died, that money became mine. And when my children put me in that home, I waited until they were gone, and then I took my secret money, and I left. I came here because I like it here. It's cheap, and the manager doesn't ask questions, and I have my freedom. I said, George, that is wonderful, but I have nothing. I gave everything to my son. George looked at me strangely and said, Arthur, Are you sure you have nothing? Think hard. Did you ever have any accounts or investments that your son doesn't know about? I thought about George's question for a long time. I remember when Margaret was alive, we had a small savings account together at a bank in Manchester. We opened it when we first got married, and we put a little money in every month, just a few pounds for emergencies. After Margaret died, the bank sent me letters, but I was so deep in grief that I threw them away without opening them. I never thought about that account again. It was so long ago. I told George about this, and his eyes lit up. He said, "Arthur, you must go to that bank tomorrow and ask about that account. You never know what might be there," I said. "But it's been years," George said. "Money doesn't disappear. Arthur, banks keep records for decades. Go find out." I was nervous. But the next morning, I took a bus to Manchester. It was a long journey, almost 4 hours. But I had to know. I walked into the bank feeling small and old and out of place. I asked to speak with a manager, a young woman named Sarah. Came and listened to my story. She was kind and patient. She typed on her computer for a few minutes, and then her eyes went wide. She said, "Mr. Arthur Johnson?" I said, "Yes." She said, "The account you opened with your wife, Margaret, in 1985 is still active." I said, "What? How much is in it?" She said, "So let me check." She typed some more, and then she said, "Sir, there is £147,000 in that account, including interest." I almost fell out of my chair. I said, "That can't be right. We were poor. We never had that much money." Sarah smiled and said, "Your wife was a very smart woman, sir. She put small amounts in every month for 20 years, and she invested in some bonds that grew significantly. The account has been earning interest all this time." I started crying right there in the bank, tears streaming down my face. My dear, sweet Margaret, my beautiful wife, had taken care of me from beyond the grave. She had known that I would need help one day. She had saved for me all those years without telling me, so it would be a surprise. She was always thinking of me, always loving me, even after death. I sat in the bank for an hour trying to process what had happened. £147,000. It was a fortune to me. I could buy a small flat. I could live comfortably. I didn't have to go to a retirement home. I didn't have to beg my son for anything. I didn't have to be a burden to anyone ever again. I went back to the motel and told George everything. He hugged me and said, "Arthur, this is your second chance. Now you must be smart. Don't tell your son. Don't tell anyone until you are settled and safe." I listened to George. I found a small flat in a nice area of London, not far from the motel. It was 1 bedroom with a small kitchen, a bathroom, and a living room that looked out at a park. It was perfect for me. I paid 6 months' rent in advance and bought some furniture from charity shops, nothing fancy. But it was mine. I bought a bed and a table and some chairs and a small television, and I hung a photograph of Margaret on the wall where I could see it every day. I also opened a new bank account and put the rest of the money where no one could touch it for 2 months. I lived in peace for the first time in years. I woke up when I wanted and ate when I wanted and went for walks in the park. When I wanted, I talked to George and other people in the neighborhood, and I started to feel like a human being again. I was happy, but a part of me still thought about David, my son, my only child. I wondered if he ever thought about me. I wondered if he felt any guilt for what he had done. I wondered if he missed me at all. One evening, about 3 months after I moved into my flat, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. I answered and heard David's voice. "Dad." He said, "Dad, is it you?" My heart stopped. I said, "Yes, David, it's me." He sounded relieved and desperate. He said, "Dad, thank God I've been trying to find you for weeks. The motel said you left, and I didn't know where you went." I said, "Why are you looking for me, David?" He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Dad, Karen left me. She took the children and half of everything. I lost my job, Dad. The company had layoffs, and I was let go. I have nothing, Dad. The house is going into foreclosure, and I don't know what to do." I said, "David, I am sorry to hear that, but why are you calling me?" He said, "Dad, I need help. I need money. Please, do you have any money? I know I treated you badly, and I am so sorry for everything, but you are my father. Please help me." I sat on my small sofa and looked around my tiny flat, at my simple furniture, at my photograph of Margaret, my peaceful life, and I thought about everything that had happened. Then I said, "David, I will help you come and see me tomorrow." I gave him my address. The next day at noon, there was a knock on my door. I opened it and saw my son. He looked terrible. He was thin, and his clothes were wrinkled, and his eyes were red from crying. He looked at me, and then he looked past me at my small flat, and he said, "Dad, what is this place? Where did you get money for this?" I said, "Come in, David, sit down." He sat on my small sofa, and I sat across him on a wooden chair. I said, "David, I am going to tell you a story, and I want you to listen without interrupting." I told him everything about George and the bank and my wife's secret savings and the £147,000. David's eyes grew wider and wider. He said, Dad, you have all that money and you live in this tiny place. I said, yes, David, because this tiny place is mine and no one can take it from me. Then I said, David, I am going to help you, but not the way you think. I am not giving you money. I am giving you something better. I am giving you a chance to change. He said, what do you mean? I said, there's a small shop for sale near here, a grocery store. The owner is retiring, and he wants 30,000 pounds for it. I will buy that shop for you, but you will work there every day. You will learn to serve customers. You will learn to be humble, and you will learn the value of hard work, and you will pay me back every penny over time with interest. And if you ever treat anyone badly again, especially someone who loves you, I will take it all back, and you will never see me again. David started crying. He fell off the sofa onto his knees, and he cried like a child. He said, Dad, after everything I did, you would still help me. I said, David, you are my son. I will always love you. But love doesn't mean giving you everything. It means teaching you to be a good man. It means showing you that money is not everything, and family is not a burden, and people are not garbage to be thrown away when they become inconvenient. That was 2 years ago today. David runs a little shop. He works 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, and he loves that he lives in a small room above the shop. And he says it is the happiest he has ever been. He calls me every night and visits every Sunday, and we have dinner together at my tiny flat. And he tells me about his customers and his problems and his dreams, and I listen, and I give him advice, and I am his father again, not. His wallet, Emily, and James visit me sometimes too. Karen lets them come on weekends, and they sit on my floor, and I tell them stories about their grandmother, Margaret, and about their father when he was a little boy, and they laugh, and they ask questions, and they hug me, and I am their grandfather again. Not a burden. Life is strange, my friends. It takes everything from you and then gives it back in a different form. My Margaret taught me that love never dies, and my son taught me that people can change if you give them a chance. And I learned that being old does not mean being worthless, and being alone does not mean being unloved. If you are old and alone and forgotten, remember this: you are not a burden. You are not invisible. You are a treasure. And the right people will see that one day, maybe not today, but one day. Hold on to hope, hold on to love, hold on to yourself. My name is Arthur, and I am 78 years old, and for the first time in my life, I am truly free and truly happy and truly loved, the way every person deserves to be.